It's gonna be alright.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Good to see everyone here today and some familiar faces. We're excited to have Rufus Pollock back with us. Rufus is a social entrepreneur and one of the co-founders of Life Itself, an organization filled with pragmatic optimists doing some pretty cool work. And today we'll be diving into one of their projects, the Second Renaissance, which is a project offering an accessible framework for understanding our current civilizational crisis and awakening. The project serves as an accessible entry point, helping people make sense of and engage with the emerging ecosystems and concepts such as metamodern, gameB, metacrisis, regenerative practices, all stuff that we've been exploring here at the Stoa for the last 4 years. And I was talking to Rufus a week or so ago, and I'm happy that this project is here because the Stoa is like the anti-legible project. So if you're confused with the Stoa space and what it's about, this is a really good session to plug into. So how today's going to work, Rufus will be presenting in a moment for about 30, 45 minutes, and then we'll have a time for Q&A. We're here for 90 minutes in total, and have about 30-minute buffer room. All right, everyone, welcome back. Good to see the smiley faces. So I'm going to tag in Rufus in a moment. In the meantime, feel free to just pop maybe a word or a few words of where you feel like you belong on the map, or maybe where you belong that's not on the map. So feel free to populate the chat at your leisure. And yeah, I'm going to tag in Rufus now, and he's going to present for about 30 or 45 minutes. And if you have questions anytime, pop them in the chat, and we'll have some Q&A afterwards, and perhaps another breakout room in the interactive portion. But that being said, Rufus, welcome back to the Stoa. Oh, you're on mute.
Great. Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Really lovely to be here and lovely to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. And thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure. So yeah, today I'm going to walk through this project. I'm going to just share my screen. I think that's going to work. Give me a second for that to set up. Yeah, if there's any issues with that, let's see if that works. How is that going? Can people see it now?
It's not come through yet.
Not quite come through. Okay.
Now it has.
Is
now
it
it has.
now? Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, excellent. So yeah, I'm going to walk us through this and talk about the project. And I want first to say a really little bit about myself and the people behind the project. So I'm Rufus Pollock. I'm one of the co-founders of Life Itself. And we're a collective. We've actually been around now for about 10 years. And we're dedicated to bring forth a radically wiser, weller world. And we favor approaches that prioritize inner development and cultural transformation in a rigorous, practical way. And particularly, we actually kind of get up to a whole bunch of stuff. We do research, we engage in sense making about the emerging paradigm, and we actually do a lot of kind of practical side of things. Like we've run several co-living spaces or residential programs, what we now call deliberately developmental spaces. One here in Bergerac, in Southwest France, in Berlin, in London. And we've run a whole bunch of initiatives. We've been involved in starting companies and a variety of things. So it's kind of like really, you know, we joke sometimes we're trying to be like Buddhists, like practical kind of collective action for the new paradigm, as well as thinking about it. And you can find out more on life.org if you haven't heard of us. And I want to say then also something about people. There's kind of a set of curators for the project that include myself, my colleague Catherine, who I'm not sure is here today, Daniel Johnson from Limicon, like James Baker, who's started Intentional Society, Lauren, my colleague here today, Simon Grant, who's involved in Life Itself research, Rosie Bell, who's been an editor, and Sylvie, my co-founder at Life Itself. And in addition, I just want to really, first of all, they're not all here today or whatever, really acknowledge this has been a team effort, even if I'm here today presenting. This is on behalf of the group. And in addition, there's also a whole bunch of advisors, including Peter here, who's very generously given some feedback, but Alexander Alibina, who is the co-founder of Rebel Wisdom, Daniel Thorson, the Emerge podcast, and many other things, Isabella Granich, Jamie Bristow, Joe Lightfoot, Narayan Wong, Oren Slosberg, Peter, Phil Chen, and Rich Bartlett have all, and others, but our advisors include this group who've been very generous in giving us some feedback, giving advice, and so on. So big thank you, and also appreciation to a lot of wisdom, expertise there. And there are others we haven't listed. So yeah, big thank you and acknowledgement and appreciation. And I want to then come a little bit to tell you about this project. What is it? What is it about? What's the purpose? So to start with, what is it in a simple sense? Well, in our view, and this is kind of on the site, like our current civilization is kind of crumbling, leading to a period of crisis and rebirth, what we could call a second renaissance. But there are many terms I want to acknowledge, I just want us to be very clear, we're using that, as you'll see, for the name of the project, but there are many names associated here: metamodern, metacrisis, polycrisis, integral, teal, liminal web, gameB, regenerative, and more. I mean, it's so there's a lot of existing terminology, and that's really all kind of covered or related here. And this project is supposed to be a simple introduction to this moment of civilizational crisis and awakening and the emerging ecosystems related to it. I'm going to say a bit more in a moment about that and the motivation. But just to highlight, there are basically three interconnected parts of the project itself. First, there's the accessible narrative and a theory of change. Second, there's like maps and navigation tools. And third, there's like a space for dialogue, discussion, and collaboration. And I'm going to walk through this just a little bit about like kind of the why of the project, why are we doing this and why particularly those items. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the accessible narrative and the theory of change, which you'll find on the site under that. And I want to say a little bit about that. So most of you here are really familiar probably with these ideas. You're here on the Stoa. If you go to the front page of the site, I think many of you are going to be like, hey, I know all of this already, and I hope that's often the case. There's nothing really new about them. And that's exactly right. For an audience like yourselves, we're not hoping you really discover something new, at least on the landing page. So what purpose does it serve? Well, for us, that part serves two purposes. First, we're giving you and ourselves something you can share with people who maybe aren't yet so into the space. Maybe they're on the edge of it. Maybe they're completely unfamiliar. But this is something that is more shareable, we hope. Yeah, you personally might know all about metamodernism, metacrisis, the Great Transition, but what about your high school best friend or your parents or your aunt, whatever? They don't maybe really understand what you're up to or what you're into. And what is particular here is that what we have tried to do is present these ideas in a really simple and accessible way. And so you can kind of be like, if your friends are like, what is it that you're going on about? Rather than having to like go, oh, here are the 10 different podcasts, or here's the, 5 different presentations from the Stoa I'd recommend, which we also want to highlight, by the way. But you could be like, okay, well, here's just at least a very brief intro, and then go and read these other things. And more deeply, we think for this movement to have a chance to succeed, partially, at least one thing that's crucial is to have a narrative that's easily comprehensible and accessible. And this is maybe the beginning of efforts about that, but that's one thing we were focused on. Now, second is a reference narrative for people who are already in this space. Okay, so here you might be like, okay, I do know about this already. The second point here is that what we have noticed is that we have a lot of these familiar terms. This great moment of change. Well, some people call it metamodern, metacrisis, polycrisis, all of these things. And we have a sense often we're talking about the same thing, but are we really talking about the same thing? Do we actually really agree on what this moment is composed of and what it's going towards? Do we really agree on the theory change and how we get there? And our sense is that's not so clear. And I'm not saying, by the way, that it's actually important that we do all agree, but it's least useful to not be like thinking you're talking about the same thing when you're not, or the other way around, talking about two different terms, which actually are basically the same thing, which can very much happen in this space. What is the difference between a polycrisis and a metacrisis? Is it significant? Is it not? So our sense in the past few years, last 4 or 5 years of talking to quite a lot of people, is that there's a lot of excitement. We're all very excited. We're very interested. We feel there's this big moment of change, yet it seems when you actually engage in deeper conversation, there isn't, what you thought might be agreement or alignment may not be, or vice versa. Where you thought maybe there was disagreement, maybe there's agreement. And it may not be clear because there's this confusion about different terminology, about different narratives, about different priorities. And so what we're doing partly here, the narrative, is at least providing one clear one. It's not certainly not the only one, but being able to be like, okay, I agree with that part. That makes sense. That logic, that's kind of resonates, or I don't agree, but you at least have something pretty clear you can point to and go through with people in that regard. And align or at least align on where you agree or disagree. I'll walk through that in a moment, and that might be a bit clearer. The next point here is about having an ecosystem mapping. The second point here is we found this space can be quite confusing, especially if you're new to it. There's a lot of material, there's a lot of new terminology. And that's why we've done this mapping work to provide maps and like other navigation tools for people to find their way around. Okay, and the third part is dialogue and discussion, because we believe that things become deeper and richer and maybe even like more accurate when there's quality discussions. And that's why we created the space of like the wiki, the chat, and the forum. So there's kind of a space to explore these ideas more deeply and more profoundly, and to look at them in terms of like what do they actually mean in practice, what do they imply, and so on. What do they mean socially and politically? So okay, so let's come to an actual bit of a walkthrough of what's there in the project. So first of all, if we look here, we've got like the intro narrative. I'll come to that for a second. And I'll actually walk this through because I think this is one of the things I mentioned that we've done quite a bit of work on. I don't know if my internet connection is being slow or it's just being slow to write, but here we are. And I'll also open this in the meantime. So I'm actually going to talk this through because this is this distillation of the narrative, and I think it's good to look at together. So we live in this moment of civilizational crisis and awakening, from the old paradigm of modernity to the new paradigm of interconnectedness, wisdom, and inner growth beyond capitalism. And the first point here that we kind of call, we use this kind of metaphor I'll mention of illness. And if people have any Buddhist background here, they might you could think of a resonance with the Four Noble Truths. So first is there is illness. Our world shows serious signs of something being up. We're witnessing escalating series of interconnected crises, ecological, political, and social, and the illness is serious. It might even be terminal for our civilization. The systems of global society risk collapse, resulting in a large-scale destruction of life. And accurate diagnosis is vital. Treating the superficial systems won't be enough here. We must address the underlying cause. Metaphorically here, if you've got a headache and you keep having a headache and you take paracetamol and it makes it go away, or aspirin, great. But if you've actually got brain cancer, all you've done is hide the disease. You haven't actually gone to the root of this illness. And in fact, you've ignored it. And I think this is the kind of thing that I hope most people are probably like just nodding, yeah. Then the second part of this is that foundational to our civilization are shared views and values. Like water to the fish, the views and values we live by are often invisible to us, and yet they shape our way of thinking and being, what we believe is possible, what we prioritize and dismiss, what we consider normal. And this breakdown that we're seeing originates in our cultural foundations of our societies and our civilization. The symptoms we're witnessing have roots in the views and values shared at a cultural level, the paradigm of modernity. And to be specific, modern views and values are, like individualism, progress, rationality, freedom, and equality, have brought extraordinary material progress and advances in individual liberty. Yay! This the kind of thing if you go to effectivealtruism.org and you see their front page, you kind of see the positive hockey sticks. But however, these ideas now cast long shadows, like endless growth, materialism, techno-solutionism, and addiction to certainty and control are driving global exploitation and destruction of nature, nihilism and loneliness, and an ever-widening wisdom gap. Okay, so this is the source of the illness. This is the kind of, now I'm not saying it's this simple completely, we could definitely, but there is a specific diagnosis here, right? This is part 2. There's illness, and part 2 is what is the source of that illness. Now, the good news is that I'll come to is that there is potential healing, but any solution here must go to the roots. This is a key claim, I think, and I'll come back to this even when we look at the map, that we cannot address current crises through the logic and value systems that contain to them and continue to drive them. And any solution must be radical in the true sense of the word. They must go to the roots. And we need profound shifts in our ways of being, thinking, feeling, and acting, and the emergence of a major new cultural paradigm that transcends modernity. Now, the good news here is that paradigms do evolve. This is an important point because the one point is that unlike technology, which we see evolve very rapidly, culture doesn't evolve nearly so rapidly, and cultural paradigms evolve even more slowly. But they do. Views and values can change. The deep stories that shape our civilization have evolved throughout history. In particular here, we point to the last Renaissance, and that's why the project is called the Second Renaissance, where there was the change from pre-modern to modernity. New paradigms emerge, transcending old ideas and offering responses to the problems and limitations of the old world. However, there is darkness potentially before dawn. This is a time of crisis. They indicate that modern civilization is in decline and that some level of societal collapse may even be likely. And I want to emphasize this, that we aren't being Pollyannish, that, hey, it's all okay, we're gonna solve it necessarily immediately, at least. One version could be that it's like we are planting seeds right now that will live through winter to spring. Winter is coming, but so is spring, we should say, for the Game of Thrones fans here. And the crisis in particular can inspire transformation. Think of yourself even personally, when we've often shifted ourselves in our own lives, moments when we've actually grown in profound ways or transformed in profound ways. Unfortunately, it's often been out of deep challenge, crisis even. Often when things are going great in our life is not when we actually really take ourselves on. And that's true maybe even civilizationally, that breakdown can be a precursor, maybe even a necessary precursor for deep cultural transformation. Modernity was born out of the civilizational collapse in Europe at the end of the medieval period, leading to the First Renaissance, a period of great cultural renewal. And so a regenerative paradigm is needed. Modern materialism has reduced complex life to a sum of parts and deprioritized the human inner world, and it's leading to a breakdown. A livable future will demand a new paradigm rooted in understanding of the whole, and something is emerging. Now, much is yet to be determined, and I don't think there's even necessarily one future that we're going to. We do have a sense of the kind of views and values that might underpin a wiser, well world. And here's a list. I think it's important to be specific in our experience. Maybe people have different lists, and that's fantastic. But one of the things we see when we talk to people is they really do want to see something a bit concrete. I mean, there's even more material we have, which is not here at the moment, about the theory of change, of how we get there. But just to start with, inner growth prioritized over material growth in this future world, with a recognition of our potential to consciously evolve, personally and collectively in multiple dimensions. I mean, this is integral 101, if you like. A renewed cultivation of wisdom based in the recognition of the limits and value of reason, the importance of the whole, and the value of the long term that includes all of the living. Into being, this is a term a bit coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist Gage Buddhism teacher, but seeing clearly and profoundly our interdependent relationship to each other and the planet in a way that is regenerative, ecological, and connecting, spirituality and religion even, going beyond secularity, one of the sacred cows of modernity and a great victory in many ways, but to reintegrate spirituality and religion into collective life. And finally, beyond capitalism and socialism, that is grounded in new ways to actually assess value. So to kind of conclude, part of this is obviously already happening. Paradigm shift is possible. It's not easy. The road may be difficult, but it is already starting to happen. And an ecosystem is emerging of individuals and organizations bonded by this shared recognition at a historical moment. And I emphasize that you can go further. In particular, you can download the white paper if you're interested. I need to actually fix that. I mean, just a second. You should actually now go. I need to fix that link and send you to paper. I'm not. I need to fix that 1 second, but that's okay. This is the white paper anyway that you can read. So just to kind of come back here, and I will go back, is that you can read a lot more. We've got like a 30 page paper about that you can look at, that talks in more depth, and again is not original. I want to emphasize we're not seeking to be super original here. It's more trying to provide a kind of more detailed overview of these ideas based on the kind of things that we might know in the background. And you can have a look at that. We're also working on a video because we know that obviously some people really don't want to read a 35 page white paper, or even, they want more detail maybe on the website, or they want something other than slides. They would like that. So that's something we're working on. We'd love help with. And then there's the course option, which is something, the emphasis here again is like, it will be based on the material on the site and the white paper, but is a chance really, in our experience, it's all very well to present something like I'm doing today, but really people need to make sense of it for themselves. They need to question it, bring their own interpretation, their own ideas, get to dialogue with others together. And so we've done a pilot of this about 6 months ago, and another one. So we're now wanting to do another round of this, a more mature one. And you can sign up now at secondrenaissance.net/course. It's not really that public on the site, so it's like a secret link, but you can sign up now, and that will be going live in a couple of months, I think. And it will be a cohort course. So the idea is particularly to connect people who are interested in this. And then let's just come back to the ecosystem site, and maybe there's quite a bit of work here. This is on like the mapping and the kind of finding stuff. We're working actually with some of our colleagues on an ongoing like mapping of organizations. I want to apologize in advance. I'm very proud in a way of this map because we put a lot of time and effort. We know, and we must apologize that it's got major biases. It's oriented to the global north, for example. We actually have done mapping of organizations in the global south, thanks to a collaboration with Commonweal. But obviously, there's just a challenge in these maps. So we hope it's both useful, and we know it's obviously partial, inaccurate, missing important people. And we wanted to get something out rather than, never release something because it won't be perfect. But I hope, I'd love to have more discussion. And, again, like putting something on a two-dimensional map that is multi-dimensional won't do justice to it. But yeah, and I can talk more about that and that effort. And maybe people notice the slight borrowing from the integral 4-quadrant model, that at least from left to right, it goes from inner to outer. So I can talk much more about that, but that was the result of quite a lot of work. And we also have done these mapping projects, and in particular here, we did a significant mapping of organizations. This was actually 4 years ago, but we've been updating it over 2 or 3 years, and we're about to release a major update with hundreds more organizations. This was a very preliminary take in 2021. But if you're interested in actually finding organizations, we'd love to talk more and do more there. There's also a much longer paper if you want to read it. There's a full report. And other things we're trying to do, like a Rosetta Stone, we use the term cultural paradigm at the moment because we think it's a little bit more accessible, although, for example, my mother definitely doesn't think it is very accessible, but compared to, for example, effective value meme, which is, for example, the term mainly used in Hanti-Freinacht, which kind of cultural paradigm or worldview, we think there's a kind of use here of just mapping sometimes the same word across different domains. So that kind of work of like building a glossary or a dictionary. We're also working the wiki. my colleague Simon Grant is working on that, and we're all working, but there's like trying to collect list of key concepts. Here we're working with Phil, who ran the gameB wiki. So, you know, there's like a list of concepts that we're going through, and, you know, how they fit together. You know, there's a bunch of stuff. We did a mapping, I think, if I have it correctly, I'll just find it here, publications. So we did like an overview even here of the many names and of this ecosystem. Like, you know, even just, is there one ecosystem? Is it multiple ecosystems? But even in the core, you know, second renaissance might be one term. There's metamodern, there's metacrisis, there's integral, there's like polycrisis, there's liminal web, there's the great turning, there's regenerative, there's gameB, there's ecological civilization. the list, there's quite a few. And this was one example that we were doing of just trying to map synonyms or potential synonyms, and also identify maybe what are similarities and differences. And my colleagues Elisa and Catherine presented on this actually at Limicon in quite a bit more depth, and we can point to the presentation on that. So yeah, so to kind of come back, again, I want to allow a lot of time for discussion. So there's, you know, I talked about the map. There's a chat and a forum. So there's a Discord chat linked on the website, which is at the moment the default forum. The forum is perhaps under development at the moment, so you should mainly use the chat and the wiki. But we're exploring that. But this is a place where it's a bit more formal. We can discuss these things. And I kind of want to then, having said that, like just say how some of the things fit together. So like the intentions to come back are like discovery for, you know, newcomers or people on the edge, or, you know, or so on, to discover. Then there's people who want like maybe paths in. And the aim here is not that we necessarily path in, but we can point, you know, if you're looking, you're like, oh, go to this community, or, you know, go check out this, you know, this part of the store, or go check out, you know, this group or this organization. So that kind of paths aspect. And then like the understanding and like more mutual understanding and alignment. So those, you know, there's a kind of the three components I mentioned of the accessible narrative and theory of change, the maps and navigation tools, and the space for dialogue, discussion, and collaboration. Kind of often they support multiple of the intentions that are there. I also want to emphasize this is a very, you know, we really welcome participation. We have regular now, it's going to be weekly open meetings on a Tuesday at noon Eastern time, 6 p.m. Europe, 9 a.m. Pacific. There'll be like curators will be there. So if you want to come and get involved, you've got questions, if you want to make suggestions, add things, particularly there's a lot of work we can do on the wiki and other things, please come along. Just to then mention some next steps you can take if you're interested, is you can sign up to the newsletter currently on Substack. The details will be coming out. We'll be sending those details about how you can come to a call in the newsletter. You can join on Discord or contribute to the wiki. There's a chat link right in the navigation of the site. And then you can like view the ecosystem as well. Obviously, you can go there and look. And that's the last thing is please like share it, you know, please also, and give us feedback, you know, like what do you think of it? What happens if you send it to a friend? You know, if you were looking at this kind of friend who you wanted to tell more about this and you sent it to them, what did they think? Did they find off-putting, or what did they like? That's something we're very, very interested in. So to kind of wrap up on what it is at the moment and what it's about, it's a gateway to the second Renaissance. So it's kind of a portal, a way in to, and by second Renaissance, to think of the metamodern, metacrisis, liminal web, you know, they're not saying it's like that, you know, it represents all of them, but I'm saying it's one take. You know, the way we frame it sometimes is like there's this incredible emerging art field. You know, you're going and you're seeing these cool exhibitions somewhere in basement, and this is like one art gallery. It's one way of presenting some of it, and there are the wonderful art galleries. Like I think Peter, you know, I seen the Stoa, you know, over the last, well, almost now, met quite a few years as an incredible like gallery, like the leading edge, cutting edge gallery. And I see there's another maybe like more one. It's like a little bit not quite as much, but very similar and very complementary and resonant. So like that kind of gateway to these things. And you can learn more and get in touch. There's a contact page, and obviously, Lauren can put our email like hello@life itself, but also my personal contact. I'm on the Discord and everything daily. So if you want to reach out, that's one way. I think that's it for the moment. If there's anything more, I can come to it in the appendix. So I might stop sharing. And I guess before we went maybe to joint questions, I don't know whether, first of all, I would love, Lauren, if you've got the Menti link, that we put it in just for a moment. And I don't know if we could do that and then maybe have some brief questions. And then I was going to have maybe in a few minutes after taking a few questions, Peter, we'll open a breakout room, and there'll be a specific question I want to ask in there. But first, yeah, just if people could take a minute or two, there's this link to a Menti, and we're just like interested in, what terms you use when talking about this space, or even it might not be one, it might, you not see it as one space, but or this kind of area, or when you're talking about things like the Stoa or this other stuff, or the second Renaissance type stuff, or metamodern, whatever, metacrisis. How do you talk about it? What terms do you use? That would be really interesting. So please just take a moment, fill that out. That's a part of an ongoing research. That would be really interesting. And yeah, that would be great, particularly when talking to others, obviously, that would be interesting. Give people about a minute for that.
I'm sorry, I must have missed the instruction on what to do with the Menti. Are we supposed to
Just fill in terms. So what terms do you often use when talking about this space or these kind of things? What terms do you use to describe someone? Like, you're like, oh, I'm really interested in, if like someone says, I'm really interested in, permaculture, or I'm really interested in gardening, or I'm really interested in electric cars, we know what they're talking about, right? Or even, but one of my struggles over the last, I've tried to recommend several different terms. It's like, yeah, there isn't yet one agreed term. Maybe there won't be because it isn't one thing. Who knows? But it's certainly interesting to know what people use. That's the question.
Just to be sure I'm on the right place, it says waiting for the presentation to start.
I'm on Menti. When I go to Menti, it says enter a word, enter another word. So I'm on the link at the bottom. Is that
the slide says waiting? Oh, yeah, or the slide view of it. So what that means is that it's not showing the presentation of all the responses yet.
Yeah, once you've submitted the slides, don't worry. Once you've submitted your thing, you're done. So let's come back here. That's great. So we won't show the results yet until everyone's in. So anyway, let's come back. So first of all, I've looked on the question. I want to take a few questions first, if there were any comments or suggestions or points people have, and then we'll come in a moment, I think in about 5 minutes or so, to a breakout room for about five minutes or so. So yeah, I'd love to thank you. I've been reading through the chat questions, and feel free to flag your question in the chat and we'll talk about it. Rather I pick it out. But yeah.
I can select a few. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. And I do have one for you, Rufus, to kickstart us off. I was kind of thinking of back to our conversation about like making this space legible to people who are just kind of onboarding or got like a sense of it. And that was sort of like not the Stoa's ethos for like 4 years. It was like kind of like anti-legibility. And I just pulled up a book that I was thinking about. There is no anti-memetic division, which introduced the term anti-meme. So basically kind of like something that doesn't go viral, something that doesn't spread. And it seemed like the Stoa had sort of like an anti-memetic ethos. And so I'm wondering what you see the pros and cons of both approaches. Like, what is the pros and cons of the anti-memetic kind of ethos, and what's the pros and cons of the project, the Second Renaissance project's approach?
Well, so there's two parts. One, I just want to flag something. It's just I don't think an aim, generally, not that you were saying, but I just want to flag that I don't think an aim is to go necessarily viral or like be super successful as a meme, as you know. What I do flag, I guess, and I should look where I have it, is like there's a kind of there's a going back to the two whys. Like, so I think accessibility, in my experience, is, you know, even people I'm wanting to tell about it, so which maybe not be going viral, but like you know, for us, we even like this project kind of to some extent is scratching an own itch where we're like, people come to the Life Itself Hub in Bergerac and they'll be like, okay, so what is like Life Itself really about? Or like, what are you guys committed to? And we're like, oh, well, we wanted this kind of paradigmatic change. And then like we insert like 8 buzzwords and like, you know, it's like just having a distilled, okay, this is the theme. And, you know, like doing those slides on the website, which are by no means perfect, but took quite a lot of work, surprisingly. You know, it wasn't like just kind of walking through that logic. And I think, so I kind of think that part is whether you want to be like mimetic in the sense like, oh, it's really got like, it spreads. And we could come to the term also Second Renaissance. Like, why did we, you know, I've been a big advocate for metamodern, for example, in the early version of our release 4 years ago. I was like, let's all try and, you know, use more term. I could talk about why we're using Second Renaissance as a term for ourselves at Life Itself a bit more, but which relates to that. But I'm just saying, so one point is, yes, even to people, you know, you want to be able to communicate. And the Tower of Babel is a useful story, right? Which is that when we have, when maybe it's not just about terms, but when we don't have a very clear way of explaining something, that is an obstacle to collaboration, you know. So that was one aspect. And I don't, by the way, I really want to emphasize, we don't think there's like one way here, or like there's really like, I think there's many art galleries in this space also. And I also think there are many, you know, there's not like one future we're all going towards, but I think there are maybe commonalities, at least within in some set of people, right, about what that future looks like. So I guess for me, also, I'd emphasize that I would always prefer like kind of accuracy over like oversimplification. But yeah, like also my collaborator Sylvie, you know, she kind of comes from an art and a communications background, and she's just like, come on, you know, like we can make this more readable, you know, to people, more accessible to people, a little bit, you know. That was her kind of view. So that's my take. I think there's also another point that maybe is deeper and relates to the cause point and what the Stoa does in general, Peter, that I think is amazing in the very name of it, that you called it, the Stoa, which is that this isn't just about information, it's about sense making. And that takes engagement and dialogue and discussion and grappling with things and feeling into it. And I want to emphasize that again, which is, in my experience, people just going and reading the landing page will be no help. You know, I really think there needs to be people engage with these kind of material and dialogue and discuss and make sense for themselves and pull it a bit apart and put it together in the way that makes sense for them. So yeah, I don't know if that answers a bit the question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick kind of follow-up. The people on there and the groups and organizations on the map, I sense most of them would be cool and okay of kind of like with this label, Second Renaissance. But I'm wondering if there's anyone on that map that like wouldn't vibe with that or just wouldn't kind of resonate with that label.
Well, I think it's something we were very, I mean, I'm not sure about the word label Second Renaissance. I don't, you know, they might prefer definitely you know, we used to use the term PIP, right? Paradigmatic, integrated, pragmatic change makers. It's just a bit of a mouthful. Like, you know, part of my, you know, yeah, so I don't know whether they would vibe with that, but I don't know, and I don't know whether people would all be happy with the map. You know, some people, you know, I definitely think there's probably things that people would like maybe disagree strongly about the map. And one of the ideas we actually have is putting together a toolkit where people could build their own map. I think it would be a really fun piece of sense making to have like an afternoon where you're like, make your own map. You know, like that would be a super fascinating experience where you saw, you know, what regions would people create? What entities would they put on it? I think that would be fabulous and like would be interesting to see what similarities and differences there were. But yeah, I think just to be, I don't know, I haven't had it yet because the map's only recently out, but I'm sure there'll be people who will like, you know, I had it last time, even in 2021 when we released like the pit thing, you know, there were people like, why haven't you put us in the direction? I'm sorry. I was like, I'm so sorry. Like we don't have that much money. We basically have almost no money. And like, we did our best to include as many people, and we screwed up, and we'll add you, you know, if like there's something missing, tell us and we'll try and correct it. So I'm sure there's things missing or mislocated.
And
I apologize.
And just intuitively, I think that the only one that I sense like group that might not resonate is like the rationalist or less wrong group that would be like, no, like they may have challenged the whole, I don't know, presupposition or something. But I sense most other people would be agreeable to it. So let's go to some Q&A. Alia, you had a question.
Yes. Hello. First, I wanted to say I love the paradigm shift approach. I've been thinking a lot about elegant solutions when it comes to a lot of these overwhelming problems. And to me, a paradigm shift is something similar to an elegant solution, the like root level. So I really appreciate that. So my question's around essentially this, when you think of this paradigm shift, what's your hypothesis on how it might occur? I know there's different ideas about paradigm shifts, whether it's related to like new knowledge, new information, new practices, or just like the institutionalization of knowledge and how it reaches like certain critical mass. So I'm curious about that. And in what ways might it be an implicit shift or an explicit shift, something that people are actively thinking about, or something that just happens as a result of certain cultural changes? And then finally, also curious about the role of scale. Is there a critical mass for it to actually be a paradigm shift that offers like meaningful change? What if there is a paradigm shift that's already happening, but it's just a small numbers of people kind of scattered around the globe? And so, yeah, curious about the role of scale. I know that's a lot of questions, so feel free to pick and choose.
Great. Yeah, great questions. I mean, so let me just get, if I go one. So one is the question of scale. And your first point was about, just if you remind me, it's like paradigm shifts, like how do they happen?
Yeah, how do you believe they happen in this particular context around like Second Renaissance?
Yeah, and this is exactly this partly why writing out stuff in the white paper, by the way, is useful because we can go into that. And there's actually a second paper that we're working on, which is more the theory of change. And I can put a link where you can look more in our view a bit about the theory of change. Because one thing, by the way, that I'm kind of interested in also in that, what I call the Four Noble Beliefs, jokingly, like, you know, there is a problem, it's serious, this is the diagnosis, cures are possible, like paradigm shifts do happen, and this is what it kind of looks like. And there's then, you know, the eightfold path would be like, how does it happen, right? Like how does that happen? And one of the points I have is I think sometimes there's like drop off as you go down, like the level of agreement, like many people agree there's a really serious issue. How many of them agree on that diagnosis is maybe lesser, and so on. I'll put a link in here to the thing. So one is, I think cultural paradigms probably shift by like small groups of people being what we call pockets. So there's pockets of the Second Renaissance or pockets of metamodernity or whatever you want to call this thing. I like the term, by the way, Second Renaissance as an aside, because it's neutral about the name, the destination. I don't have to get into a debate with you. Is it teal? Is it metamodern? Is it, you name it? It's more describing a period, right? And we can agree there's a period of a time between worlds. But the point is that I think there are pockets of that start happening in places. So if you think about the last Renaissance, I think historical analogies are really helpful. So like, there was Florence, there was, at least in Europe, there were these things that happened, and that they were localized. Or think of the Enlightenment, Goethe is off in Jena, and like there's a whole bunch of people around there doing stuff. It's not like all over Europe, or there's Voltaire has gone to Geneva. Things happen in local regions, and then maybe they spread, or they, so I would say they network, the pockets network, you get to a region. So one of the other dreams of life itself, at least, is that we we contribute to creating transformative regions, in particular, why we're based here in Bergerac in Southwest France, next to Plum Village, is because we want to try and create a transformative region here. And we want to see ones happen all over the world. Danielle keeps telling me Toronto is a hotspot. But yeah, so I think that's one thing. The thing is, you're right that a lot of this is unconscious, but I think what's new in this point is like, I don't think people in the Renaissance, they were aware there was something going on, but they weren't like consciously aware of like, there are cultural paradigms. We're engaged in the shift of one. This time around, I think there's more, awareness. And I think that's, Ken Wilber, who I would say integral. If you looked at the whole of this on the map at one point, we wanted to draw an integral river flowing kind of everywhere, because I would say one of the key connectors through many, many of these organizations, not everyone, they don't necessarily agree with integral, but like they influence, Hands you find out, if you talk to them, will say, look, they in their flattering self-description, maybe they say, we're Marx to Wilber's Hegel, they're turning it into a political philosophy, what was a general philosophy. But to go back, Wilber's key point is this conscious cultural revolution that we kind of finally, in integral, you first see the unfolding of paradigms and also the unfolding of inner development in a way, and that you consciously engage in it. If I'm doing fair justice to his words. So that's part. And then in terms of scale, I mean, ultimately, you have an aspiration that you're going to shift the paradigm of the world. I mean, at the moment, the direction, I don't want to blame modernity. I think someone's got a comment there. We simplified a bit on the site. These things go deeper. They go to our craving, like what's going on goes to our inner greed, if you want, our inner deep things in our psyche of being, that are transformable, but are pretty like profound and aren't just there in modernity. What modernity did is like, the 13th century wasn't very nice, but they didn't have technologies to destroy the planet. They didn't have nuclear weapons. They didn't have advanced AI. They didn't have the capacity to overconsume 3 times the planet each year or something like that. That just didn't exist. And in addition, modernity has given this obsession with progress, this addiction to control, like we can work it out through reason, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to be like, oh, it's all modernity, but there's this point that it's, the climate crisis, a key point is the climate crisis is not a crisis of systems. It's not a crisis of technology. It's fundamentally a crisis of being. Yeah, and that is under, I think, accepted, what we call the primacy of being thesis. That of course you need technology, of course you need institutions and laws, and of course you need culture in any paradigmatic shift. But which is most important, or which has like your hemispheres? You have a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere, citing McGilchrist here, but which should have primacy? Okay, I want to give a moment for the breakout rooms for 5 minutes or like 4 minutes, maybe Peter, 5 minutes or 4 minutes. The question I want you to discuss, I would love people to have a moment to discuss together, because otherwise speak. So how do you explain this to others that you want to explain it to? How do you share about this? How do you find it easy? Do you find it very difficult to explain these ideas to your friends, your family, or whoever it is? That would be what I would be intrigued. And maybe, Peter, can we set it for 4 minutes just because of time today? Does that work? 5 minutes? Great. So that's the question. We'll broadcast it eventually. But how do you explain this stuff, these ideas to people you care about or want to share it with? I would love, some sharing from, I'm intrigued about what people whether they find it easy to share, how they share, but I'm also just happy to have other questions about the project. But that, one of the things I'm trying to prompt is like, I think, one of the ways also this area grows, and I think it is a good idea if it grows, I guess, maybe gently, is by sharing and sharing kind of powerfully with others. You know, so I'm intrigued, and I'm also happy to take more questions. So either one is good if people want to put their hands up, or you just want to pick something from the chat, Peter. If people don't put, that's great with me.
Sophia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I really enjoyed my conversation in the breakout group. I was just in the midst of saying before it ended quickly that I wonder if some of the fragmentation and difficulty in bridging these communities is due to the fact that we view the kind of the outcome of the Second Renaissance as very different. And so it's difficult sometimes, and I find this locally as well, when I'm running events or kind of have an idea for a community. It's you know, I have a certain idea, but it might be difficult to communicate that to someone, or agree or compromise upon a solution that doesn't necessarily fit with their worldview or how they see, you know, the second, like what the second Renaissance will bring. So, and I think that's normal, right? Like I think if we have a lot of different visions of what the future holds, I don't think that any of those necessarily, I guess, like prima facie have any I guess priority over the other, but just something that I notice is a difficulty that I'm confronted with.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sophia, it's a great point, and it relates to that point. You know, I said, as you go through the Four Noble Beliefs on the Second Renaissance landing page, you know, is there a problem and is it serious? You know, there's a whole bunch of people who don't even agree that, right? They might be like, you know, Mark Andreessen is like, there's a techno-optimist manifesto. The only problem right now is there too many people getting in the way of doing unrestricted AI research. You know, it's like, there isn't a problem, you know, so it can vary. But as you go down, you have that. Now, I want to go back to, I said, one of the reasons for doing this, I think even it doesn't have to be agreement, but having specificity about the, for example, at the last point where we say, here are some aspects we think are likely of a second Renaissance, you know, here are some of the views and values. At least then people can be clearer. Because I think one of the things that otherwise happens, people are like, oh yeah, I really agree, which is great. But then there's a point where you're like, oh, actually, we don't agree. And then, but they haven't realized, and once you disagree, doesn't mean that you'll disagree forever, but you can at least be, oh, this is what we do agree on. This is where we have a difference. Why do we have a difference? Let's explore that in a constructive, loving, you know, open-minded, and rigorous way. So one of the big things is like, what can be useful for this site? You don't need to agree, but you might point to people and say, okay, what part of this, you know, I thought of having a voting point at one point. Now, how much do you agree with each of these kind of slides as you went down the page? And that's really interesting. So I just really want to emphasize that. I think the second point is, I do think at some point we will, like when I say we, I should be very careful. I think that if people who want paradigmatic change, there will need to be some more alignment amongst some of them if we want to be effective, right? And I guess this is a delicate point, but a big distinction between, let's say, metamodern or integral or teal thinking and postmodern is, yes, we see difference, we respect, we want to be inclusive, we see, but we're able to order things again. We're no longer in the flatland of like everyone's view and everyone's vision of the future is equally valuable. Kind of no, like, yes, they're all valuable, but they're not equally valuable. You know, the joke I have for it works for Buddhists is that Buddha didn't talk about the Four Noble Opinions, right? He said the Four Noble Truths. Now, it's true that it's in a relative dimension. So we know our Buddhism, right? Ultimate dimension, that we're all beyond concepts and there is no, you know, there is no truth and all that stuff. But like in the relative dimension, there's truth. And I don't think that means there's a truth, that I have it or that anyone else has it, but there's an up and there's a down. And for example, that's another key point. So I think that having that discussion about like, where are we going to? You know, the way I say is, are we going to the mountains? Which mountain are we going to? And then there's discussion about what's the path up the mountain. And both those discussions are valuable and important. Yeah. And I'll have one other kind of maybe sad story, you might say, Tower of Babel. If you look what happened in, let's say, Marxist communism, this is a delicate one, but if you think of one major like progressive movement of the last 2 centuries, right, that kind of, I think most people think failed, like we could get into that. You know, For example, most people were saying to like Lenin, no, this is not Marxist communism. You've got to wait. It's supposed to be a democratic revolution. And if you're not clear, you end up having your movement like, things can be hijacked in not good ways. So I think getting specific about where you're going and being a bit clear about that, like, hey, we believe in nonviolence or whatever it is, those things are going to be important at some point, I think. So anyway, that's a long answer to a simple question. Kim.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, just multiple thanks for all the work it takes to put all these things on a map, let alone to do this massive amount of research and to stay open to what else is forthcoming, because the map changes, and of course, you don't want to get too embedded in it, or you can get stuck just in looking this way. But I wanted to say that what occurs to me is that 20 years ago, we weren't here. 5 years ago, we weren't here. We were in a process of, we are on this edge of it happening now, right? This is an unfolding at this moment, and we're still in a separate paradigm. We live in separate groups. We identify ourselves with separate thoughts and philosophies. And as we are moving forward, if it's a linear thing, and we are evolving, that is shifting. Like we are at a phase where some of this is disintegrating. It's almost like literally disintegrating, and we no longer see the boundaries. So we're not there yet, but we're heading closer to sort of touching each other. And we're having this discussion, and all the things you're bringing to the map, all the things we're all our thought processes in the current / old paradigm. I mean, we're still thinking about, we can't imagine ourselves into the new paradigm in order to describe it. We're just not there yet. And so I'm watching this discussion happen here, and we can see what might be unfolding, but we're not there yet. So that was just a comment.
Yes, I mean, I don't know if I'm being controversial, but I think this, like, one of the things is there's a danger here, and I will speak for myself, but maybe is that it's kind of easy to talk and have conceptual ideas about this, and it's really hard to embody them. And the metaphor I sometimes think of is like being a concert pianist. I could give you a textbook, say, look, just put your fingers, here's here's Bart's Goldberg variations. Just put your fingers here, just do this, and that's all you need to do, right? And it's years or decades of practice and skill to embody those things. So I think there's this huge gap. And there's even a slight point about that I would maybe make. I don't want to, this is a kind of side point maybe, so I don't want to take us off too far, but one of the things is that like modernity and metamodern, like there's a tendency, like I don't think I'll be saying something controversial, that maybe Integral was quite heady as a community. Like it's kind of got a lot of the ideas, but the ability to embody it it turns out to be very hard, right? It wasn't like the Integral Institute went really well, as a teal organization, for example. It seems to have been quite challenging. And I would say my own experience of trying to be involved in communities, boy, I mean, I've got loads of shadows. It turns out, I've got lots of reactivity in me. This stuff, when you could talk about it, like, we want to be like, go beyond individualism. Well, okay, what does that actually mean? Does that mean going back to like pre-modern amber, or what does it actually look like? And so I think you're really correct that like we have got a long way to go to actually embody this stuff, like go from the conceptual. But I think what it also said was really lovely, and I think really want to acknowledge is that maybe if I was understanding correctly, like some of the boundaries that were separating different groups that were maybe actually allies are kind of gradually like becoming more porous. Quan.
I come from the heart of the Silicon Valley. So all around me, that's where I come from, a materialist. And I find that when I approach people, unlike the people in this group here, they don't have a concept of the spirit or the mind, or it's more like everything is mechanical and you just manipulate this, manipulate that. So the way I approach it is to kind of slow talk to them about what are they interested in, what drive them, and and then try to get to them to understand that there is a dimensions that it was not material that kind of moves you in ways that you sometimes do things that you don't understand or appreciate. And so in a way of introducing them to dimensions of mind or psyche or soul, and which I really appreciate your graphic with the you gave me a new language of explaining it in the graphic where you provide from the agricultural standpoint. I usually use the biology and like Michael Levin's kind of like animistic kind of thing, but you provide a more agricultural kind of metaphor, which is that it's the roots that under the ground that really supports the plant up there, and it is occult that you cannot see it. It's not you can feel it. You can do all kinds of. I mean, it's like opening the eye to like these occult dimensions of the psyche.
But just if I can read on cultural evolution, just to say, so maybe a couple of things to say there is like, I think one thing you get, so first, thank you for sharing. I think you're getting at like, how do we communicate powerfully to different audiences? You know, and one of the things we talked a lot about in this project over the last 3 or 4 years of working on this kind of accumulation of very different things is, you know, we even did an experiment 2 years ago where we went with kind of early material like this, we actually kind of like recruited our friends, but from different communities. Like we had friends who were effective altruists, we had friends who were really into permaculture, and we had people we knew who were really into climate activism, and and the reactions were very interesting, right? Like if you go to the same material to someone who's coming from a background of like effective altruism and someone who's coming from like, I don't know, shamanism, you're just not going to work, right? They have very different like pre-existing worldview. And so one thing I would say, like, not that you were asking, but like in the case, people who are quite like analytical or science-based, you know, there's material coming out, let's say on cultural evolution, or there's like Ian McGilchrist's work seems to be quite successful, you know, if you're talking about like at least the inner dimension, because he's a neuroscientist, he's very well read, there's lots of citations. But, you know, for example, on cultural evolution, there's this work, you know, coming out from Joe Henrich at Harvard. That's, for me, like he uses words like ontogenesis, you know, in his book. You know, he's got this incredible work showing the roots of modernity and basically culture, and like in a really deep way to do with the way that the Catholic Church ran a marriage and family program. And it's a fascinating book. His book of The Weirdest People in the World book. You know, but just to say, like, that's also one way in. And I think this leans to the point that maybe there are different landing pages or flows for different people. You know, that's one of the things, that there may be different material that we would curate or different ways of framing that would speak to different audiences. And so I think that's a really, really great point. You know, and it's hard to shape people's worldview depending on where they're coming from. Tiffany.
Yeah, thanks, Rufus. Great presentation, and want to come back to the map a little bit. Great map, a lot of really awesome things on there. I'm wondering, you know, in the principle of permaculture, there's this edge effect, and in the edge effect, there's like a higher diversity of species in these overlapping ecosystems. I'm wondering, I guess, so in these spaces, like on the edges, this is where the most like photosynthetic production happens, and therefore yield. And thinking about how something like that could be designed with these edges, I guess kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that. With a map like that, how, could it be designed in a way where you could get more like functionality and utility out of how things interact and how like borders naturally arise, I guess?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first of all, obviously the challenge of the two-dimensional map is that it's difficult to show too many things next to each other. I mean, technically there's the mathematical like full color problem, but one of the things I think is that there is a lot of cross-pollinate, a lot of regions that are kind of next to each other on this kind of map that we can't fully show. I mean, just to say one thing maybe quickly about the map, if my screen loads, is the way I saw it was like a slice through it, kind of like, I don't know if you'd like to say through a sphere, but like, or like a salami slice. Like there, basically all of these areas that on the map have a load of things which are outside of like the second Renaissance or metacrisis, whatever you want to call this kind of ecosystem. Like, alternative education, there's loads of stuff in alternative education. But like spiritual and contemplative traditions, it's like huge, right? So these are things that if you thought of this as a piece of salami, like these things extend, but like there's a particular slice that somehow represents more this way of thinking. And particularly, I think, root of that is what I often say, interested in paradigmatic change, interested, the PIP definition we had in 2021 in our original piece of work on the ecosystem was people who are interested in paradigmatic change and people who are taking inner and outer approaches. So obviously, if you're in spiritual and contemplative, you might focus on spiritual and contemplative, but these organizations on the map are ones that should have an integral and paradigmatic lens, or an integrated inner and outer change lens. That's what this slice on the map, through a much kind of longer salami, right? There's lots of spiritual and contemplative work that goes on in the world. But why are these ones on the map? That was when we were thinking of it as like kind of the criteria, or like there's lots of alternative politics. But for example, why aren't there a lot of like Marxists in alternative economics here? Marxists are interested in paradigmatic change in general. Almost definitely, they're the original paradigmatic change people, but they're kind of basically bottom, in Wilbur terms, they're bottom right? They're basically a system change. There's not any inner dimension much in Marxist thought traditionally. I mean, we could get into that, but Marx didn't have a lot of psychological, ontological depth to his thinking at the time. I'm a really big fan of Roberto Unger. I don't know if people know Roberto Unger, but he's like this amazing political thinker, still alive at Harvard and has been a minister in Brazil. I have a lot of time. We're actually doing interview series with him, but he's quite like structural change is his big focus. And he thinks that leads to maybe inner change, but it's not really the focus of the work. So that maybe explains a bit about the thinking. But I think it's true that many of these, because many of them are focused on inner and outer, even if you're over here, they're interested in like outer change, which the map can't really show, right? It can't show that that aspect of this ecosystem is very rich, in my view. So great question. Victor.
Yes, thank you so much for doing that, first of all. And in terms of like how to communicate, I would say that I probably use in a way positive and negative reinforcement, and think about like appealing to the values of the person, and first of all phrasing in terms of crisis in relation to the value. For example, like if the person sees crisis of leadership, I appeal to that. If there is a crisis of meaning, I appeal to that. And then I shift conversation more towards the future that the person envisions and wants, because I think everyone has some positive future inside of them. It's maybe just not verbalized enough. So I appeal to that. And then I have a question in terms of probably more like a framing of the diagnosis that you mentioned, and I also put it in the chat. Basically, you said that like you specify modernity as the leading cause, and I was thinking about maybe it in some, like for me, first time when I saw it without your explanation, I thought that this is like in a way it puts me into us versus them mentality, where these are like whatever modernists that are harmful, right? And I know that you brought in the conversation that there is a value in modernism too, but I was thinking about framing it in a way more maybe broadly or generally as ignorance, and ignorance manifests on pre-modern, post-modern, modern times. So, and then we can specify like what is specifically problems with the ignorance. So, and yeah, that's my main question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we've gone back and forth because it was also a question of like how much we wanted to put there. I think you're right, first of all, by the way. I think that ultimately the issues lie in our ways of thinking and being in kind of general, like not, and we have got to change that front page that might make that clearer. I think the most powerful thing we're trying to communicate in the diagnosis is that it relates to kind of culture and being, that it isn't, for example, when I go through this with climate activists, they're like often like, no, like it's our institution, like they're like, oh, if we only change our system of, or if we change capitalism, it's capitalism, right? Yeah, like, but just for example, notice that like communist and socialist institutional structures also trash the planet pretty effectively. In fact, maybe more effective than capitalist ones. So there's this kind of like, that's the biggest thing we're trying to communicate. So I take your point. I really agree with it. And I can really welcome, by the way, suggestion of how we can language that better. So please, thank you. That's a really, really good point. Yeah. And just on the negative and positive reinforcement, one of the other reasons, so I haven't gone into like the kind of like why the second Renaissance term, like why are we like it? I mean, one is just we use it at life itself quite a bit, but one is in our experience, if I use the term metacrisis, for example, I talk about crisis, it's quite negative. Like people's immediate feeling is like hopelessness, really. And the second Renaissance for me, why I liked all the idea of rebirth or something like that is that it has this aspect of acknowledging that there's going to be a breakdown. It's not, well, there might be, maybe there won't, but maybe there's possible or likely, but that there can also be renewal. And so that is also I think a really beautiful part of what you were sharing. And we have this, it's not up, this will be maybe a post, but like we have this thing of like, often at the moment, like debates, particularly like say over climate crisis, kind of fall into either it's going to collapse, right? Either it's like, doom, it's kind of over, civilization will collapse, or like we're miraculously going to swing the wheel and like we're just going to miss that and it's all going to be good, like we're going to like we're going to innovate our way out, we're going to have solar panels. And I think there's something in the Renaissance or general thing of like, there are multiple parts, there may be more or less serious collapse, there may be maybe we can avoid it, maybe it's about planting seeds that go through winter to spring, but there's also this kind of message of like hopefulness, but acknowledging the darkness before dawn. So that was very beautiful what you were sharing. So thank you about that, of like the positive, acknowledging the risk, because if people aren't motivated without a bit of crisis or risk, but also with that kind of like, yeah, and there's possibility, 100 years ago, most women couldn't, 100 and a bit years ago, most women didn't vote in the freaking world. Like if you were gay, in most countries, you were seriously oppressed, there are massive transformations possible in our love and caring for others. And there's also huge darkness possible for us. But, it's really hope. Hope is not naive hope, but it's really crucial. And I think it's another thing that I see around me. I mean, many of my friends who are not, I grew up with, there's a huge amount of cynicism or nihilism or despair right now. People see something not working, they're fed up, there's things in their society, but they see no real positive hope. It's like at best they're offered like a little bit better version of capitalism. Like, it's like, here's your new iPhone, it's got a screen that's 10% bigger. That's the best on offer that we can politically have. No, like, we want a world where every human gets to profoundly flourish. And that's possible. That's not crazy dreaming. Now, it might not happen in this ego mind's manifestation, but it can happen. It's a possibility, and it's a possibility that will certainly requires belief in it. It's a flame that grows stronger when we believe in it, when we see it, when we nourish it. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of this as well, is that to go beyond naive hope, but like to be like, yeah, it's not just the meta crisis. There's also the meta rebirth. don't know if anyone else wanted to ask another question. But yeah.
Peter Jones, maybe that'll be our last question.
All right, if you have a minute for one last one, so I'm a professor, and I think of paradigms as something you can't really honestly forge and create and kind of push out there. You can work towards one, but when they're actually, I think, a feature of being adopted and therefore being accepted by common practitioners. So some of this paradigm might be accepted within the tribe, within the tribes on the map. But a few times you've mentioned, the civilization or the world, which I think of as different things. So I have kind of two questions. They're big, but they might also be short. One is, what's your theory for the potential emergence of the paradigm? That is, the emergence of what might be recognized, over time as the emergence of this reawakening of second Renaissance. So we work with different foresight methodologies like Three Horizons, which would typically, for something like this, not have anything less than 20 years. And I just wonder what your time frame and your theory of action and theory of change is, just roughly what you're considering, and how does that affect your idea of the crisis? So if the polycrisis seems to me very present, and it will probably have a different framing for it in less than 5 years. The metacrisis seems to be much longer. So I'm just like, there's a relationship between the crisis period and coming out of that. And I wanted to ask your question about that and about your theory for the emergence of time. But then also, is this Western civilization really? Because we aren't going to speak for China, Global South, and other civilizations that are forming. There are massive changes there. And so should we clearly be thinking of the West, of Western civilization?
So several, taking things in reverse. So first of all, this is most definitely, I think this paradigmatic emergence of a new one is most definitely not Western. I mean, obviously the term second Renaissance, I just want to acknowledge in the paper, there's a longer point about just like speaking anyway for we, it's very difficult, right? And I really I'm not, and I also think this will emerge in many different places. That said, let's say a couple of things. So for example, there's good evidence like that modernity is spreading around the world. Like modernity, while I think you could make arguments that it emerged, I think in the West, right? That, there's this famous actual data like Engelhardt work on the World Value Survey, that people are like moving this way. Now there may be reversals, and there's another good example from Joe Henrich, like talking about China, which is China's adopted a lot of the structure. A lot of the structure. My young son is coming into bed, so if there's noise in the background, like for example, China in 1949 adopted the marriage and family program, basically, that was driving the Western, what he would term modernity, right? So in 1949 in China, they banned having multiple wives, basically concubinage. They did a bunch of other things, which is crucial in like Henrich's view to the emergence of modernity. So stuff is happening, and obviously, I think it goes back and forth, for modernity, think of the hundreds of years that's taken. There's the Renaissance, then there's the Enlightenment. The first country that, you might say the US, or maybe England, like in the Civil War in 1640 to 1645, then you got 1789, then 1776, 1789. For it to get to dominance, for a paradigm to get to dominance in a society, a cultural paradigm, can take a long time from its emergence, right? So decades, centuries. We live in an accelerated time, so maybe it's decades rather than centuries, but definitely decades on that. And I would say it would probably even become, just to go back, look at this map. I mean, you could debate whether this is like the leading edge, if you want to have that debate, but in general, there has been a movement of countries over the last century in this direction, which is, by the way, self-expression would probably be even more postmodernist, but certainly secular rational, moving up in this direction would be classic modernity, right?
Okay, but those dimensions are also 20 years old. There
Yeah,
might
well,
be
their principal components analysis out of a data set. And I agree, like one of the things right now that would be fascinating would be to have better real-time data on cultural evolution. That would be like fascinating to see, right? Like, and I don't actually know of that. I mean, I talked to Joe Henrich at Harvard. Is anyone collecting, like he did some work with Facebook data, but looking
Peter
at
Turchin.
real-time evolution or smaller time evolution of these would be interesting. For example, you know, just to be, we use the classic integral spiral dynamics kind of terminology and colors in the white paper, but it's extremely under, let's say, under-resourced academically, right? There isn't a survey, there isn't a way that's been derived from any data set. You know, it's used a lot in our community, but it's like got very poor academic backing for it, for example. But you could map it across. I mean, I think Inglehart and the Wesel map is a good example of something quite proximate. But that's just to kind of finish, like this is getting into the richness. Like I think you can evidence paradigmatic change, for example, the development of modernity. The scale it happened on was like from leading edge, let's say its emergence in, you know, it had earlier roots right back in Athens, but from its emergence in Italy and Florence, you know, Western Europe to like global dominance would probably be like 600 years. You know, I wouldn't say that you had a majority of the world's population with the elite of those societies. I'm not even saying the majority, but the elites of those societies, political and social elites running on modernity was not till probably 1950, right? Now, post-modernity had much older roots, but you'd say it came to like certainly emerged in a major way in like the late 60s in the US or something like that. You know, you'd point to, you know, philosophy, you know, mid-century. Is it becoming, it's culturally maybe dominant in a lot of like Hollywood work, 50, you know, I mean, you know, early postmodernism is like Picasso. Yeah, then there's a debate, is postmodernism a full cultural paradigm, or is it an interim to another? This is a big discussion. It's a complex question, but if you're getting into these discussions, this is the kind of stuff you'd look at. But so to finish, the polycrisis is coming soon. I think the polycrisis, metacrisis is different. I think how quick or how soon there would be emergencies of significant size pockets, like at the level of like political or social autonomy, i.e. people get to actually enact laws, run the institutional systems that they get to run on like metamodern or whatever teal. I would be betting on decades at this point. I don't think it's going to happen in the next decade. I think there might start to be isolated small pockets. I would dream that it might happen in this body mind's lifetime, but it may well not be. And I think, you know, the story that people sometimes tell also about the monasteries, that they were havens that preserved things through the Dark Ages, is one way to sometimes also see things. I know talking to Emil from Hansi Finite that that's more his view. Depends on how pessimistic or optimistic you are.
Right. So we reached the 90-minute mark. Probably best to gently close here. Rufus, any kind of parting words or any information you'd like to leave us with?
I want to first just thank everyone for being here and your presence and your interest in these matters and your commitment, if they are like probably in your life, most of you, I don't know you personally, but are taking actions towards this. I was in a breakout room, like, you know, it was really beautiful to hear that. And I think there's nothing more exciting than this opportunity to contribute to these kinds of change. I think it's really like, you know, I think it's rare, you know, and I think also, and this is more of maybe a curse, we'll live in interesting times. I think for variety of reasons, the real challenges are coming quite soon. For reasons we're probably aware, like the situation, the ecological crisis, the way that we're handling technology. I really think that we're going to have an opportunity to make be part of something in a way, whereas if we were going to be young in the 1980s, sadly it turned out it was a period of kind of counter-revolution, right, of counter-reformation. So I think that that's something I'd say. And so I really want to live is like, you can make a big difference. Like, I think, and going and sharing this right now, I think that there's been a real shift in the last 5 or 10 years. Certainly the last 5 years, the number of people more broadly who sense that something's not working, who are at level kind of like there are signs of illness, is really dramatically expanded in my sense of at least the, not super rigorous, but the sampling that we do and what we see. Certainly the last 10 or 15 years, and even more in the last 5 years since COVID and other things, the situation, the predictable fact that we're not going to solve very well the collective action problem of the climate crisis. Right now, we are full speed ahead on like that. Like there's been no slowing down. And I think there's just a warning set of people, but they don't know, they don't see a credible way forward. And so this is something incredible to share. I feel this kind of work that's going on in these kind of communities, this kind of area, I think it's a moment of like real thing, because we're offering credible hope, a credible path that's otherwise deeply missing. And I do want to say, I know maybe they've got Peter, I do think in this lifetime that there will be founded of parties that will get elected or will, in the next 10, 20 years, 30 years, that will happen. They may not get full political power, but they will get there. So I just want to be so thankful to be here with you, and yeah, go forth and share these visions. That is the beginning of this, is sharing hope.
Awesome. Thank you, Rufus. Yeah, everyone give some gratitude to Rufus in the chat or visually. Thank you so much for coming back to the Stoa today. It was a delight to have you. And one thing I appreciate about Rufus's work and life itself is the overall hopeful vibe. I liked how you described it earlier. Like, yeah, winter's coming, but spring is coming after that, which is definitely a phrase I'm going to be using. And stay tuned, because Rufus and I are going to be having follow-up conversations and perhaps a series which will be announced on my Substack, which I'll pop in the chat. And I also popped a Google Doc for upcoming Stoa sessions. So that being said, Rufus, everyone, thanks so much for...
Thank you.